Yeah, thanks for coming. It's great to see a crowd this size. You might wonder why we would choose probiotics as a topic. There's so many other important things going on.
I'm sorry if I'm in your way.
Today related to our health, epidemic of diabetes, obesity, heart disease, cancer. How are all of these things less important than probiotics? Well, probiotics may relate to all of those diseases I just mentioned. And being inundated by the commercialization of this market for probiotics. So I thought that talk about first defining what probiotics are and what they can do for us and what potential benefits and harm they may have. Now, when we're talking about probiotic, we're defining something that has been around for a long time. There was a Nobel Prize winner in 1907, Dr. Melchnikov, who first predicted that something in our intestine, living organisms, the bacteria in our intestines, could possibly be changed to somehow affect our health in a positive way. So he was a man ahead of his time. So what are we talking about here as far as the magnitude of all this? When we do our genetic testing here, where we collect saliva and then send it off and have it analyzed, we're looking at a small number of the genes in the human genome. And those are 23,000 total genes that we have in our bodies that are ours. There are 8 million genes in our bodies and on our bodies that don't really belong to us. They're just here. There's 100 trillion bacteria in our intestine of 1,000 different species alone, weighing approximately 4 to 5 pounds worth of organisms just in our intestine. And then we have the bacteria and yeast and viruses on our skin, in our noses, in our throats, in our gums, all of those things. So as you can see, it's a huge amount of genetic material. Why are these things here? Why haven't they killed us by now? You know, what's going on? So we're somehow in a balance with this natural phenomenon of symbiosis where we're helping them, they're helping us. And what have we done in our modern medical therapy to cause problems? We give people lots of antibiotics. We kill off good bacteria. We have changes in our diet where we're eating more meat and fatty foods than we did in decades past. This is obviously affecting our microbiome. And by microbiome, I mean all of those living organisms in us and on us that aren't really part of our genetic makeup. So we have that. We have the microbiome. We have probiotics, which are living organisms that we're somehow trying to decide whether or not they're therapeutic for us in some way. And then we have prebiotics, which are actually non-living substances that the probiotics, the good bacteria, can consume and thrive on. We'll talk about where those are coming from in our diets and what we can do to help enhance that. If you're going to be spending these kind of prices on something that's going to help you, that's living organism that you're taking internally, and then you're not consuming the food that's going to help them survive, then you're wasting your money, obviously. Well, without further ado, I'll turn things over to Olivia, and we'll go through the show. So take it away, Olivia.
So it's bacteria, viruses, and other microorganisms that inhabit our body, or inhabits in our body, and is essential to our human health. So there are about 100 trillion microbiome cells that are in our intestinal tract itself. And then out of all of our human cells, only 1 out of 10 with the microbes. I feel really echoey. That 1 out of 10 of all of the cells that are on our body, 1 out of 10 of them are human. So that's a lot. Just like the other statistics that Dr. Morris said, 23,000 of human genes in our body, of the human genome, but 8 million of the human microbe. So next click here. Okay, so looking at our entire body, we have different species and some of the same species in different areas of our body. So this includes the skin and our stomach and our intestines and our urogenital tract. And all of these are really important to our human health. So they live in us, we give them a place to live, but they're also very essential to our health. So, and this is still growing. We don't know exactly why, but it's also very developing, and we'll kind of talk about that development in a little bit. And then another click. Okay, next. Okay, so today we're just focusing on our intestinal tract. I don't know what just happened. So, imagine the picture up here. So we have good and bad bacteria in our intestinal tract. And so they're always balancing and fighting for nutrients. There we go. So all of these help aid in digestion and our vitamin synthesis and all of that. So when our intestinal tract becomes imbalanced and it can become upset, and then those bad bacteria can overcome the good bacteria, and that's when those bad symptoms come that make us really uncomfortable. So like bloating and diarrhea and other things like that make us sick. And we'll go into all that in just a second as well. So what specifically disrupts this human microbiome? So part of it sometimes is antibiotics. So that's why we want to be careful when taking antibiotics. Lifestyle, staying active, being healthy, not being sedentary all the time. Also diet, eating a good amount of fiber, getting your vitamins, your minerals out of your food. Having a low-fat diet as well, and also hygiene, which we'll go over that as well. So excessively cleanliness can also alter that microbiome. And then that can also lead to chronic inflammation and metabolic dysfunction, which we're not going to go into today, and then also that imbalance in our digestive tract. Next. Okay, so Dr. Morse is going to go over this pathway of linking carnitine that is in a lot of our red meats and cheeses and eggs, and how that also can develop within our gut and with TMAOs, and then also lead to atherosclerosis, and how that all is in conjunction with each other.
What we're dealing with here is prevention of diabetes and coronary disease, atherosclerosis we talk about all the time when we're doing our testing. And there was a very fascinating study came out of the Cleveland Clinic last year relating carnitine, which is, as the name implies, carne asada or whatever, it's meat related. This is an amino acid that's found in red meat. And it's not in the fat, it's in the actual lean part. So if you're saying, well, my doctor said I shouldn't really have red meat, but I get the lean stuff, that doesn't hold water with this topic, because it's been shown that carnitine is a problem. It's very common, it's very prevalent in the red meat. And then choline is a similar problem that's found in egg yolks and in cheese. And lecithin is the main supplement you'll see sold on the supplement shelf as something that's supposed to be good for us, even though our bodies can make as much lecithin as they need, and they can make as much carnitine as they need. Vegans who never eat any meat have have enough carnitine in their system to keep them going just fine. Now, how does this relate to the microbiome and the probiotics and all of that? Well, part of this study involved looking at people who don't eat any meat at all, vegans, and looking at a factor in their blood called TMAO, which has been shown to have at least a 50% effect on your risk of heart attack or stroke among 4,000 people who were studied at the Cleveland Clinic, between the people who had a high level of TMAO versus the people who had low level. The low level people had a 50% lower risk of heart attack or stroke versus the ones with a high level. So the vegans didn't have, they were in the low level group. So you then take the high level group and you give them antibiotics. So with giving people antibiotics in the high level group, these were people who were eating meat on a daily basis. We call them omnivores. They eat chicken, fish, red meat. They eat pork, cheese, eggs. If you give them antibiotics for a few months, their TMAO level would drop significantly. It dropped down similar to the vegan level. Then you stopped giving them antibiotics, and the TMAO level reverts back up. So we can see then that by giving antibiotics, we're killing off the bacteria that are metabolizing this stuff and turning it into something bad. Now the interesting thing here is that the vegans, people who don't eat any meat at all, their carnitine, you can give them all the carnitine you want, give them, and they do not produce this TMAO. So something's going on about eating meat that raises the level of the TMAO in their blood and leads to a 50% increased risk of heart attack or stroke. So this then ties in with the need to look at, if we're going to be taking probiotics, so the good bacteria, where are we going to get the prebiotics? Prebiotics are the foods for the probiotics, and those are all from vegetable sources. There is nothing in animal products other than perhaps yogurt that can help the good bacteria live. This all has to come from the vegetable kingdom. So that's just another reason to eat less red meat and eat more of our healthy veggies.
Okay, so triclosan, this is more of an environmental type hazard. So it's an ingredient that's added to certain soaps, antibacterial hand sanitizer, cosmetics, and toothpaste to help prevent bacterial contamination. So what happens is this was actually considered a pesticide in the 1960s, 1970s, and then they've added this. And so what this does is it washes into the sewage, and then it creates and pollutes water bodies. And it's also very hazardous to aquatic animals. So the research has shown that it alters hormone regulation in animals, and then it may contribute to the development of antibiotic-resistant bacteria within the sewage, and then it recycles into the environment. So it can be very harmful, and it can also be harmful to our immune system. And antibacterial soap has been proven that it shows no benefit over regular soap. I actually looked in my kitchen last night and I have it in my just soap.
It's hard to find it without it.
I know.
No, but mostly they sell it with that stuff.
Yeah.
And it's in your toothpaste too. A lot of toothpaste has it. So if you're swallowing that stuff, then it's harming your natural bacterial microbiome in your intestine.
Yeah. And then I was looking at another study, and it was testing children and adults with toothpaste, and was showing up in their urine as well. So it can be very hazardous. Did I just click that, or did you do it?
No, I
Oh,
know.
I was like,
I'm watching you.
sorry. factors, those are just few factors that affect our intestinal microbiota. So other factors are antibiotics, and we're going to go over that in just a little bit, and other drug intake, and then microbial infections, diet, which we went over as well, highly processed and low fiber foods, stress, and not just stress that life can cause us, but also stress like when we can't sleep, that can cause a lot of stress. And also if you're over exercising or overdoing it, that is also can cause a lot of stress and also upset your intestinal biome. And then contaminated water, colon detox or cleansing. One of the handouts we'll show you, or we'll hand out to you, one of them talks about gut myths, and one of them actually talks about the colon detox. And I've never done it, and I don't really recommend for you to also do it. Obsession with cleanliness, not keeping those good bacteria, and also delivery by C-section. So the reason for that, they say, is when the baby is born, they're in contact with their mother's microbiota, their good bacteria, and that also helps, that contact helps them develop an immune system. So when they're not in contact with that, they say that they're more likely to develop allergies and asthma as they get older. But it's also very low.
But I've heard that there is under test now. Some doctors are in C-section cases. They're taking a swab from the mother and swabbing the infant.
Oh, swabbing?
Yeah,
Wow.
and just intentionally to infect them.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Okay, so what are probiotics? So the root of probiotics comes from the Greek word pro, which is promoting. So actually looking at the name itself, and biotic meaning life. So, pro-life. And then these live microorganisms, which is mostly bacteria, is similar to the beneficial microorganisms that are already in your digestive tract within your gut. They help increase the ability to achieve intestinal balance. That's why taking them can be very beneficial. And they also encourage growth and activity of the bacteria, that good bacteria that's already in your stomach. Next. Okay, so looking over pre and probiotics. So what's prebiotics and what's probiotics? So prebiotics, they're not living, they're actually food for probiotics. So these are found in the foods that you eat. They encourage the beneficial bacteria that's already living in your body to help grow and also promote and maintenance of those probiotics. Most of the carbohydrates that the human body can't digest, the probiotics do, and they're most likely found in whole grains, bananas, onions, garlic, and various vegetables. So all that really good stuff. And then probiotics, live bacteria that is usually found in foods like yogurt, kefir, and then cheeses, and also supplements, which we have a bunch of them on the wall. They're naturally found in your gut, which we know may boost your immunity and overall health, especially your gastrointestinal health. And non-dairy foods also have beneficial cultures, which is kimchi, sauerkraut, miso, tempeh, and then soy beverages. Tofu isn't one of them because it's not fermented. Tempeh is, so that's the difference there. There you go. And then these are the different types of probiotic and prebiotic foods. So you can see artichokes, raw onions, chicory, which I'm looking at the prebiotics here. Greens, raw asparagus, different fruits. They say berries can carry some, whole grains, and also beans. Lots of beans with lots of protein. And then probiotic foods, which we'll have here for you. So yogurt, soybean sources, kombucha, which we'll have to drink as well. So you guys can try that. All right, and next. Okay, so possible benefits of probiotics. Benefit skin infections, also irritable bowel syndrome, any type of digestive tract problems that you have, and those aren't any fun at all. For women, vaginal infections, urinary tract infections, and then antibiotic-associated diarrhea as well. So anytime you're really taking an antibiotic, it's good to take a probiotic. And Dr. Marsh will go over that in a little bit. Is there anything you want to add?
So this is something I'm sure you've all heard about, the Clostridium difficile. It's a life-threatening colitis, infection from this particular bacteria of the lining of the colon that can be a complication as something as simple as an antibiotic you got for an earache or a sore throat. Any of the antibiotics can cause this, but the big implicators here are the fluoroquinolones like Cipro and like Levaquin, and the cephalosporins like Caflex, and then penicillins like amoxicillin or PenVK, Augmentin, clindamycin. I want to make sure we distinguish between this horrible life-threatening disease and what we call antibiotic-associated diarrhea, which is a much milder problem. And that condition, the antibiotic-associated diarrhea, is caused by the same process of killing off your good bacteria with the antibiotic, but it's in people who don't have the Clostridium that's waiting to flourish and cause problems. What's going on there is you have these starches. They're called oligosaccharides, meaning small sugars. You know, a starch is just sugar linked together.
Right.
And a disaccharide, like sucrose, just has two sugars stuck together. There are trisaccharides that we see in beans that cause the gas from beans, because as the bacteria in your intestine break those down, they form gas. So when you take an antibiotic and it kills off your good bacteria, then your oligosaccharides, those small chain starches, those small chain starches do not get digested, and then that causes the diarrhea because they're irritating to the colon. So that can be cured by taking a probiotic like Floristor or Culturel or Phillips probiotic. So anytime you get an antibiotic from your doctor or your dentist, you should remember when you go to the pharmacy to get a probiotic with that and take it for at least a week after you stop the antibiotic. Now the Clostridium difficile is as I said, a life-threatening problem, and there again you want to take your probiotic. And in the hospital, we insist on giving Floristor, which is Saccharomyces, which is actually a yeast. Anybody who's getting an antibiotic in the hospital gets Floristor, and you'd say, well, how is it that a yeast can help prevent a bacteria from flourishing and causing problems? Well, it's because they're competing with the same nutrients. They're consuming the same oligosaccharides, or those small chain starches. So that then leads to discussion of the disease itself, which ironically, kind of paradoxically, we treat Clostridium difficile colitis with an antibiotic, but it's an antibiotic that kills this bad bug, this Clostridium difficile, or C. diff. And you can either take a oral antibiotic called Flagyl to kill it, or vancomycin, which is a stronger, more expensive antibiotic that specifically will go after this C. diff. And it's prone to recurrence, it tends to relapse, and the best cures are found in people who undergo a fecal transplantation. And this is where you take some of a close relative, a spouse, for example, and take some of their fecal matter, collect that, and do an enema with that. I know it sounds distasteful. We're not doing it in this community, but when we send people down to the Mayo Clinic or any of the referral hospitals, this is one option that they have to cure this, and it's a dramatic effect. It can have a 90% cure rate. So this shows the importance of maintaining your colon health and your bacteria, and also the commonality between household members, that they have the same good bacteria, and in these kind of dire situations, we need to take that as a treatment.
Characteristics of effective probiotics. So what should you be looking for? What do they do that's so effective? So they survive through your digestive system, because your stomach is very acidic. So sometimes some of the probiotics can actually die there, but if they're surviving, then they're effective. They attach to the intestinal wall and colonize to create more of that good bacteria that's fighting for that balance. They're able to produce lactic acid, which promotes a balanced pH in the intestinal tract. A lot of times, some of the bad bacteria can't survive, or they won't generate as much if the pH is at a level where they can't. Stimulate the immune system, also good viability, and then are also non-pathogenic and non-toxic. And then common probiotics, I just wrote the family for each one, because if you're looking at some probiotics, and you'll see them on the label, I have some of them on the next slide. So you have the Lactobacillus family, and you can also go to probiotics.org, and it names all the different type of probiotics that you may find in all the, either a supplement or a drink or a yogurt, and then what they actually do or what their specificity is. Okay, so Lactobacillus converts lactose into lactase, and competes with the harmful bacteria for nutrients, and produces a byproduct as helpful antibacterial substances to promote the healthy environment in the GI tract. Mostly found in also yogurt and cheese. These occur naturally in the fermentation process. And the Biobifida bacteria, you can see that in like Activia, one of the yogurts there that's added in. And then it's also has a strong ability to prevent and treat GI disorders. And then the Streptococcus thermophilus is also used to make yogurt and cheeses, by also assisting with growth in the intestinal tract. And then the Saccharomyces, that's the one that you'll find in the florist store, and you'll also see that it will help prevent that C. diff. And next. Okay, so these are all the examples. We're not going to have all the examples today for you to taste, but these are a lot of them if you're looking for some, like a good yogurt. If your regular yogurt doesn't really help, or you're looking for something new, you guys all have a copy of these in your notes. So I tried to write the most common probiotics in them, and I don't remember what else I was going to say. So one of them that you're going to taste is the Activia, and then there's about 3 yogurts that I kind of found and looked at, and then next. And then also Stonyfield. If you're looking for more an organic yogurt, then this is one that you can look for. This also uses 3 different cultures that's added to the yogurt. And then the Siggy's, this is at Sprouts. So I actually went there and I looked for some of these. Activia isn't there, but the Stonyfield one is, and also the Siggy's. And this one also has 5 different cultures. Also, to kind of go over the cultures, there's not just one that's specifically best for everyone. So everyone's a little bit different. Everybody's microbiome is completely different from another. So one's not going to just work for everyone. So kind of looking to see what works for you will probably be best. And then probiotic drinks. So these are just little dairy drinks. They're not necessarily have yogurt in them, but they are fermented from milk. So this is one of them that comes out of Japan. Yeah, I don't even know how to pronounce it. So some of these are dairy. If you aren't a dairy person, if you can't digest it very well, we'll also have some that are non-dairy as well. And then next, and kefir. You probably have heard of this before. And this is actually fermented dairy milk, which is fermented with a kefir grain. And that's what creates those natural cultures into it. So there is 12 different cultures in kefir. And these can also help with GI issues. And we'll have that to taste as well. Some of the probiotic, like the kefir, it can have a lot of sugar, but, and that's where if you would want like more of a plain and you're really watching your sugar, then probably a plain one would be best, and then you can maybe add it to like a smoothie and with berries or something. And then Good Belly, which is a drink, which is a juice. And this also can have a lot of sugar in it as well to kind of make it taste good. We'll also have that to try. And switch. And then also kombucha, which is a tea drink. And this also has natural cultures in it as well. And some people actually make their own, like yeast. And I haven't tried it yet, so I don't know. And then these are some supplements that are popular and recommend. And then also Nita made this awesome little chart for you guys and giving you also how much it costs and the different type of cultures in the probiotics itself. So if taking a pill is easier for you, then great. Or if you have a dairy issue and you are watching your sugar, then pill will most likely be a best choice.
Yeah, so you wonder, well, why don't we have a prescription for you what to do? What's going to take care of my problem? Is it Saccharomyces? Is it Lactobacillus bulgaricus? Which bug is for me? And the problem is, it's so individual. You know, we're in the N1 program here, where the one means you, that you're an individual, and this microbiome thing really fits in with that because we are very individual. I had a statistic here of the cultures that were done on 200 volunteers. The swab was taken of their belly buttons, and there were 4,000 different species of bacteria out of these 200 belly buttons. And no two people had the same one. So it's very individual. And when you go to look at what you should be taking, there is obviously going to be a trial and error. So we want to emphasize the trial and de-emphasize the error because it's rather low risk. You're not likely to hurt yourself with probiotics. You may hurt your pocketbook, of course, because these things aren't cheap. So who should take probiotics? If you don't have an intestinal problem, if you're not suffering from bloating and you're generally doing well in that department, I would just maintain a healthy, well-balanced diet. So that's a concern. Certainly people with irritable bowel problems, with bloating, with diarrhea, alternating with constipation, and you've been through all the testing, you've been to the gastroenterologist, says you have irritable bowel syndrome, here I'll give you a prescription. Well, you know, prescriptions can have side effects. At least you know what they are. With the probiotics, you know, there are these claims that are being made because they're in that supplement category where the FDA doesn't really have much power over them unless they're causing problems. So you never want to take anything without thinking about it. And we have a little sheet here that describes what you can use as a reference for when you're starting to think about taking a supplement, whether it's a probiotic or a vitamin, you name it. And this will tell you, what are you trying to accomplish by taking this stuff? What are the possible side effects? How will I know if it's working? When should I call the doctor? So those are things to think about. And when you look at some of these problems, if you're prone to constipation, then certainly the Bifidobacterium infantis that's in the line might be a good choice, because that particular bacteria is the one that's predominantly in the GI tract of infants who are breastfeeding. And those infants who are breastfed are less likely to have diarrhea from the viruses that cause diarrhea, and they're also less likely to be obese when they're youngsters. There's studies that have shown that when you're 7 years old, if you were breastfed and you have Bifidobacterium infantis in your intestine, you're less likely to become part of that obesity epidemic. And an interesting study in Denmark showed that taking lean men as a control group and obese men that had insulin resistance, metabolic syndrome, that sort of thing. And they did fecal transplants from the men that were lean to the men with the metabolic problem, the prediabetes. A 20% reduction in the insulin resistance. So there's definitely something going on here with the gut bacteria and with diabetes. And with the TMAO thing, we also know it's affecting our hearts and our circulation to our brains. So it's a fascinating area. So down the road, we're going to have testing that's available, and this is available in some reference centers where you can give us a stool sample, and they'll do the genetic testing on that sample and give you a readout that says what balance of the major groups of the 100 trillion bacteria in there you might want to think about trying to adjust. But it's really far off into the future as far as having that practical for a practice such as ours. So without further ado, we'll open it up to questions. Yes.
Could you clarify about milk protein or milk intolerance and lactose intolerance, and how this whole thing affects that, like when you're choosing a probiotic, that kind of thing?
Yeah, that's a good question. People will say, doctor, I'm lactose intolerant, I take lactate, but I'm still bloated. What's the next step? Well, one step would be to stop taking milk products in general, because many people who are lactose intolerant are allergic to the milk protein, the casein that's put in all kinds of prepared foods also. So that's a consideration. And these probiotics do nothing for the milk protein. Lactose, there's generally some logic to the naming of these bugs, like Lactobacillus acidophilus. What does that mean? Well, lactose, that's the milk sugar. And when they first discovered this bacteria, they saw that it was fermenting sugar and breaking that lactose down. And it was a bacillus, or a rod-shaped bacteria. So that's Lactobacillus. And then how did they get the name Bulgaricus? Because people in Eastern Europe took a lot of this stuff like kefir and yogurt, and they lived to be, many people lived to be in their hundreds and 100 years old. And in the late 1800s, there was a research emphasis on trying to find what could make people live longer, and researchers went to Eastern Europe and found this particular bacteria in Bulgaria, where people were very long-lived, and it didn't really pan out to be the fountain of youth, but it got its name Lactobacillus bulgaricus. So these bacteria, like Lactobacillus, are the ones that ferment lactose, but there's none of them that will ferment the protein that's in them. So we've got to watch out for that.
There's as you know, but the rest of them don't. I recently went through a very strong antibiotic treatment.
Right.
And I took the probiotics at that time. The thing that I noted was that it killed every bug in my body. And I could feel it. Just a whole bunch of symptoms went away. But then when you get through that and you start taking the antibiotics, the probiotics, again, this was a little bit different than the 4 probiotics that I took during the antibiotics and such. And I got to thinking that I had read someplace that everybody's got a different colony of
The microbiome.
micro. And that means that I just completely changed the, and do we have any guidance about what foods we should eat to get back to the original culture? Or I think I might have suffered if I wanted to get back to the original
Right.
population.
I think if you're able to consume some of these probiotic foods, you're going to be miles ahead rather than just taking an array of pills. Because for one thing, you'll get some nourishment.
Well,
You of course
that's-
want to watch out for sugar because a lot of these yogurts are very sugar dense. And then if you have a problem with milk, you'll want to try to get a milk-free yogurt. There are soy-based yogurts. There are soy-based kefirs. So there are choices out there. The kombucha is a possibility for you. It doesn't have any milk in it. It's tea-based. So there are a lot of options for you. But we are in the dark as to how to specifically tell you which probiotic you should take. Yes?
I noticed when I was doing the display up here that by far the most expensive one on the right-hand side is Floristore. It's $1 a pill, so it costs you $20 for a 10-day course. And one thing to note about that is that it's not going to be killed by antibiotics. It's actually a yeast. So it's a probiotic that is completely immune to antibiotic therapy, which is why it's used during antibiotic therapy. So there is another one up there that says that it's resistant to antibiotics if you take it in between your doses, but none of that is substantiated. But I wanted to point out that they do have different applications, just like on that sheet about why are you taking this. If you're taking it because you're on antibiotics and you want to prevent an antibiotic-related GI upset, you probably need to be taking something that isn't going to be killed by the antibiotic that you're taking, which would be the expensive one called Floristore, which is going to cost you about $20 for a 10-day course, which is what most of our antibiotics are, you know, somewhere in there. So
Yeah, that's a good point. And another point along those lines is that if you're going to spend this kind of money for a live culture that's been freeze-dried and put in a capsule, and you swallow it and it goes into stomach acid with a pH of 1, where who knows, most of that's going to be killed. You may want to be taking an antacid with it, or taking a Prilosec or some proton pump inhibitor to lower the amount of acid in your stomach so that those good bacteria have a better chance of getting down to your intestine. So there are a lot of little nuances here that we can talk about, and that's why if you have a problem in this area, we should be talking.
Well, even if you don't take a probiotic, the pill, I mean,
Yeah.
and you just eat foods, and you may pick yogurt because well, you're going to get all sorts of creatures along with your food, no matter how try how many you want to avoid.
Sure, it's tough, and especially
And
in
that
travel.
isn't that nature's way of getting the population established to begin with?
Right, yeah, I think there's certainly the
And-
mixing of all of these organisms, of which we're just the most important one, we think, as the human organism, but all of our pets are factors in this too. Our pets give us part of our microbiome. So the more you travel, the more you're going to be exposed to other microbes, and we have this condition of traveler's diarrhea, and certainly you would want to think about taking a probiotic if you're going on a trip, even if it's not outside the country, because just between here and Albuquerque, there's going to be a different strain of bacteria in the food you'll be eating there, and it's probably what we call E. coli, enterotoxigenic E. coli, or E. coli is a predominant bacteria. In our intestines, we all know of the killer E. coli that causes kidney failure and bleeding, and that's very rare. Most of the E. coli is very helpful, but if you move from one community to another, you can have some problems with diarrhea as you get adjusted to it. So that's definitely worth thinking about. Yes.
have a question because Judy and I found a chewable probiotic.
The gummy bear thing?
Yeah, like a gummy bear. Are those effective? Because they certainly helped me.
Well, they have some sugar in them, like all these things seem to. Yes, Nita has a comment on that.
Yeah, they have sugar in them, and they have about a quarter of the live culture bugs in it than the ones even on the lower end do. Most of the lower end ones are 1 billion. They when you take a dose of it, you're taking 1 billion. It goes from 1 billion to 3 billion to 10 billion to 20 billion. Basically in a single dose, and those are 250 million, which is a quarter of the low end dose per gummy chewy.
If you take 2 of them.
Yeah, and if you take 2 of them, then you're taking 500,000, which is going to be a half of 1 billion, or 500 million, which is going to be half of 1 billion. So yeah, you could do it that way. They do have some sugar in it, and those are they provide a different probiotic than the ones that you would get in the yogurts and other things like that. So, yeah.
Because I do the yogurt and those.
There you go. There you go. So yogurt, you're going to get lactobacillus and acidophilus, and that one I think is one of the bacillus coagulans, I think it's called. So.
What about
Gluten
gluten intolerant?
intolerant. Of course, you know about all of the foods. You know, don't eat the ones with gluten in it. And then these are all labeled if they have gluten in them. And so I've labeled the ones that are gluten-free up there as well. Some of them do have gluten, and many of them do have dairy. So if it says, remember that if it says okay for lactose intolerant, that doesn't mean it's okay for dairy intolerant. You know, lactose is just the sugar, and if you have a dairy allergy, then you're allergic to the protein as well. So if something says it's okay for lactose intolerant, don't take it if you have a dairy problem.
And maybe the question in addition would be, is there a probiotic for gluten intolerance? Well, not specifically, but if your gluten intolerance is because you've had chronic diarrhea damaging the lining of your intestine, and if that chronic diarrhea can be improved with probiotic, then yeah, your gluten intolerance not improved. Did you have a question?
Yeah, does she have a handout for those, what she has written down there?
Yeah, they're in the handout, I think.
Oh, they are?
Yeah.
I actually did not make a handout with those. But that most of those are in the handout, and you could just write notes on it.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll leave it up for a while, like a couple weeks.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yes.
I'm just curious with all the different brands of yogurts, how do you rate the low calorie, low sugar Chobani?
It doesn't have as many live cultures as the Activia and all. It has the natural ones that are already in the yogurt that when they're fermented. But it's still a good one to take. I mean, if it's not high sugar, because a lot of the Chobanis can have a lot of sugar, about like 12 to 15 grams per serving, which is quite a bit. But yeah, they're still.
I noticed one that was missing from the list there. Mountain View.
Not the Mountain View.
Mountain
That's
House,
a good one.
Mountain House.
Mountain
Yeah. And they're fry scarified.
It's a big.
Yes.
Yeah. That's
Yes, and I started using that because it looked like it had less additives than the Activia.
What about grapefruit?
Yeah, the Chobani is great as well.
And fine.
You want to go with the stuff that says they have live cultures, which is most of them. If you want to go with the least chemicals, then go with organic, of course. But I wanted to thank all of you for coming and thank Olivia, especially. This is, she did most of the work on this, and I think she did a great job. So.